Okay, thank you. City of Campbell is no longer requiring face coverings be worn inside city facilities. However, all are welcome to wear a face covering should that make you feel more comfortable. Should health directives from the County of Santa Clara or the Centers for Disease Control change, the city will comply. So I will call to order the special meeting of the City of Campbell City Council on Wednesday, August 17, 2022. The special City Council meeting is conducted in person and via telecommunication and is compliant with provisions of the Brown Act. This City Council meeting is live streamed on Channel 26, Channel 88, the city's website, and on YouTube. Can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Gibbons. Here. Councilmember Lopez.
Here.
Councilwoman Landry.
Present.
Vice Mayor Bybee.
Present.
Mayor Resnikoff.
Here, so thank you very much. We will hold off public comment until we go to the section with the Opticos presentation. So move into unfinished business. Item 1. Special meeting to provide an overview and update on the objective standards, work plan, effort, project schedule, and community outreach and engagement strategy. File number PLN 2022-90, and to consider a budget adjustment to reappropriate unencumbered fiscal year 2022 funds. The presenter is.
Start with me, Rob Eastwood, Community Development Director. Hope you can hear me okay. Good evening. Thanks for being with us and making time in your calendar for tonight's special meeting. My job mostly, we will do introductions, set the table a little bit on tonight's meeting, its importance, and I'll be handing it off to staff. First off, in introductions, introduce the staff and the consultant teams really supporting the presentation tonight. You, of course, recognize Stephen Rose, Senior Planner. He's our in-house supervisor of this process. We are pleased to have supporting this project, and you'll hear from them tonight. Opticos is the selected consultant for Campbell. In person tonight, we have Stefan Pellegrini, who will help present, and online we have Tony Perez, Russell Toller, and Roger Foreman. With that, let's go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. And Tracy Tam is our associate planner over in the corner, also helping supporting this effort. Apologize, Tracy. So for tonight, and I really want to underline the importance of this meeting, is to present to the council the need and the overview of working on objective standards over the next 6 months. In very broad strokes, and I know the council has heard this before in previous presentations, and from staff's perspective, given the Housing Accountability Act and the requirement that only objective standards can apply, given that most of Campbell's standards today on land use and residential design are not subjective, given we're heading into the need to complete a housing development in the next 6 months, the timing on this work plan is critical, and we did want to underline that for the council. Number 2 big point, and we'll go into it tonight, and part of the reason how we came to revising the work plan effort and selecting Opticos. The previous work plan effort tried to go into Campbell zoning ordinances and do a more elegant, subdued approach to providing objective standards, and that effort did not work out for a variety of reasons we'll talk about. What you'll see tonight is, I wouldn't say it's a more radical approach, but it's an approach that is more fundamental in opening the codes, and we believe is needed because there is not an easy way to use Campbell's subjective standards to modify them in a soft way. So we'll present that to you tonight, but I did want to underline that in going through this process, the adage of needing to break some eggs to make an omelet is a metaphor that probably would come through with this. So there is a need to open the codes a bit to do this work effort, and we want to make sure that's not lost on the council tonight. With that, for tonight's meeting, in discussions with the mayor, we suggested breaking the presentation into 3 parts. We'd start with staff doing introductions and overview. How do we get here? What's the background? And why do we need the revised work plan? And really the importance of why this is a radically different work plan than before, and what are the key components of it. After that, we'd stop for any council questions. From there, we would turn it over to our design consultant, Opticos. They have a lot of history of working on objective standards and codes, and they'll present to you their track record, their approach, and how their approach will be used in Campbell. And then after that, our suggestion is to again stop At that point, you could provide public comments, again, questions and answers from council and any deliberation. And then finally, the third part would be to walk the council through the outreach and engagement strategy we've started, getting any additional feedback on enhancements you'd like to that if needed so. And then finally, a suggestion of staff is a consideration by council, but potentially an ad hoc subcommittee. This is a very fast effort. It's a very intense effort. It results in a lot of changes. And sometimes in those environments, it can help to have a bridge between council and staff and the community of a subcommittee that just can support this effort, given it's so fast moving. So after hearing everything tonight, we'll come back to you and ask, is that something you'd like to create to support this effort? So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Stephen Rose, and he'll walk you through the first part. Thanks.
Great. I was going to say Rob took all my talking points, but we'll go into a slightly deeper dive on each. So in terms of background, as a kind of a recap. So really over the past 3 or so years, changes to state law, primarily the Housing Accountability Act, have required the city to change the way it processes housing development applications. The changes to state law are intended to provide greater certainty for developers and make it difficult for the city to deny or reduce the density of housing projects which meet objective standards. So considering that a great deal of the existing policies and guidelines in city documents are subjective, the city previously engaged with a design consultant that was Ramey and Associates with the aim of clarifying existing guidelines. In practice, we found that it was very challenging to go about taking subjective statements such as the one you see here on the screen, which is ensuring that new projects are compatible with the community character to be impractical without creating new standards. And at the same time, staff was recognizing that we were going through our housing element and general plan update process, and we needed to plan for densities which are under consideration as part of this update process, and that were really not contemplated at the same time the city's current standards were adopted. So recognizing the need for to revise the approach, staff had returned to council to request authorization to change the work plan and to circulate an RFP for a new work plan, which resulted in the selection of our current design consultant team, Opticos. So broad strokes, the revised work plan approach is intended to resolve key issues and challenges presented by the prior work plan by really focusing on establishing and consolidating new standards for the development of residential projects in a single policy document. There's a table in the staff report and up here on the screen, it highlights a few. It's a little bit low res, but it indicates that generally speaking, rather than going through each and every single one of the city's policy documents and trying to amend and correct subjective language, our approach is going to be creating a brand new policy document, which is going to stand outside the code and stand outside the area plans, which we'll reference out to, generally speaking. We won't be focusing, we're going to be focusing on areas, I'll just jump to my next slide here. We're looking at this also as like a phased approach. So as part of the phasing, we're going to prioritize development of standards for multifamily and mixed use projects, which will have the most impact to the community's character and appearance, as opposed to single family homes, which we had attempted to tackle in the prior update, but now we're looking at planning on tackling as a future phase of this process. Also, given the approach, we'll need to update the city's existing multifamily residential mixed use development standards where they occur within the city's existing zoning structure, and also create new zoning to implement land uses under consideration as part of the general plan. So in addition to the impacts to the zoning districts, we're also looking at the city's various area and neighborhood plans to reference these new standards. Generally speaking, a lot of the area plans will remain intact. And what I mean by that is in each of the area plan documents, we have these 3 major components. You have like the goals, the policy language, which is kind of at the top, the high level. Within it, you have development standards. And depending on the specific area plan or specific plan we're talking about, it has standards which pertain to the development of residential projects, mixed use projects, but also commercial projects. So we're really focusing on only addressing those multifamily and mixed use standards within these area plan documents. It's not our intention to wholesale, remove or delete sections that pertain to or need to continue to pertain to development of, say, commercial projects or standalone commercial development. Again, as previously mentioned, I mean, if you were to take one of our area plans, like say the Santa Moss Area Neighborhood Plan, the impact will be very limited because a lot of it pertains to single family residential, which we're not planning on tackling as part of this update. So again, the focus is on multifamily development. And just as a sidebar, we also have within a lot of these area plans a section which is dedicated to streetscape standards and public improvement requirements. Is like where we stipulate, again, using Santa Moss Plan as an example. At the end, it says certain streets to remain unimproved. All that language would remain intact. It's our intention to update that as part of this process. And while going through this process, I mean, even where we're taking, say, I'll use a different area plan, the Winchester Boulevard Master Plan. There's a lot of good standards in there, and we're going to be looking at those as part of this process and saying which of those are good best practices that make sense, maybe specific to that area, or might make sense to roll out more broadly citywide as part of this update process. So it's our intention to kind of do a high level pass, review the standards that exist in the current policy documents, use those as a framework and guidance for conducting this update process, taking the best of the best ideas, best concepts, rolling them forward. And there will be an opportunity as part of this process to also tailor this new policy document to have, say, exceptions to the general rule that would apply to a certain subset of an area or neighborhood, such as like the Winchester Plan or the Santa Moss Plan. This graphic here on the screen, it's actually kind of illustrative of all the areas in the city which would be affected by the update process. So really, again, focusing on the low to medium density range all the way up to our newest and highest possible density range of, say, 75 units the acre. You see major segments to say in the bottom left corner, that's like that Santa Moss area over here. That area there, I mean, you're only talking about targeted properties. Not every single property will be generally affected by the update. And it's a high level, so it's a smattering of properties that fall under these density, these land use designations throughout the city. So further, really as part of this update, the city will need to revisit the city's parking standards, which are really fundamental to design and feasibility of residential projects. So just recognizing that really a comprehensive update of our parking standards could be a work plan in and of itself. Our focus is going to be more on a practical review of site constraints and parking standards, which and kind of we're going to be benchmarking it a little bit in a few ways. One is we're going to be reviewing our existing standards, another is looking at what's allowable under, say, state density bonus law. But we're also going to be looking at some of the guidance, some of the potential parking reduction strategies identified in the draft housing element, such as unbundling parking from residential units and possibly permit parking programs as potential parking reduction strategies. Just on this point, I also want us to mention, in addition to focusing on, hey, how can we really kind of reimagine the total number of parking stalls? There might be a discussion point where we look at the dimensions of parking stalls as well. So right now, residential parking stalls are a little bit larger than our standard commercial stall. That might be something we also look at as part of this update process. Again, just in terms of overall project schedule, we have this really broken up into three major phases. The first phase, where we're at right now, is the community outreach and engagement phase. We're doing the kickoff meetings. We've got a kickoff meeting, obviously, right now with the council, but we've got a meeting next week with the Planning Commission. And immediately following that meeting, we're going to be doing kickoff meetings with the general public, as well as what our stakeholder groups, which is generally property owners of some of our housing opportunity sites in the development community. Throughout the update, we're going to be doing community engagement, so it's going to be kind of an overarching principle or theme throughout. But our next kind of major phase is the preparation review of the administrative draft, which is going to happen pretty soon, but it's going to be just high-level key aspects. We're not going to have like a fully formed out document till, say, January, February, something in that timeline of next year. That said, understanding that as throughout this timeline, we've also got those other major work plan efforts, that being the housing element and general plan underway. We plan to use this process to, say, come November, provide, say, test this concept of test fits, which I'll let Opticos go into more detail than I will, which will allow us to take a look at as part of the housing opportunity site refinement process, where we might be talking about removing sites, reducing the densities of sites. So we kind of get a feel of the actual built environment of these new housing projects. We'll have these test fit examples, which show you what's the mass, what's the bulk, what's the overall form that we could anticipate as part of those updates, which will help inform that decision-making process in November of this year. And then, yeah, just longer term, January, February, we're looking at finalizing those objective standards, and then having a combination adoption date in March for both the general plan, the housing element, and the objective standards, where it brings it all together, all at the end. So understanding, the scope of this project, we identified in the report a few guiding principles that will help us stay focused and keep us on schedule. I won't go over all the sub bullet points, but just in broad, again, big points is our intention is to kind of keep it simple. Again, one of the hangups that we ran into in our last update process is we went through all those different area plans. We tried to do all the technical edits. It became a cumbersome exercise and technically infeasible. So we're looking at, again, a single policy document, which will reconcile all of these differences, referencing out to it to the extent possible. Again, we're trying to keep it focused. Right now, as staff are identifying, even say single family, we recognize there's a need to probably update our single family development standards. But in order to just get the high priority items done in the timeline that we've got, we're keeping it focused to 3 types of development. Those are small lot single family, mixed use, and multifamily development projects. And yeah, we're really trying to stay focused because there's going to be other things that pop up during this update process. We'll identify need, but later phases. And then finally, really keeping it engaging. So we're taking all the best practices from our housing element outreach efforts. We were doing social media outreach and campaigns. We're doing MailChimp, email blasts, all that kind of good stuff. We're still ramping up a little bit in that regard. But as we continue to progress, we have all the groundwork laid out, and we're going to be really focusing on illustrations, graphics, speaking terms that I think that the general public can understand, as opposed to technical, say, planning jargon like FAR and lot coverage and terms like that. We want to really solicit the public's feedback on the overall form and design of buildings in the ways that they will interact with projects. And that actually brings us to our first stopping point for questions. And after this, we'll have a presentation by Opticos on their overall approach.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Are there questions to what's been covered, the intro, the background, and the overall parameters? I don't know who is first.
So Jeff.
Councilmember Lopez.
Stephen, thank you, and Rob. Definitely appreciate the need to simplify and prioritize. I think that's really essential, and that might require some hard choices. Do you have a timeline, roughly speaking, for addressing the single family residence update?
I can just speak to our focus right now, again, is on these standards which we're talking about. But following this update process, the adoption of the general plan, the housing element, and this update process, we'll be having a slew of things which we need to identify as high priorities, say for start of next year. We'll be returning to the council with a list of those priorities and have a council priority setting session where the council will identify these are the hot button topics which we need to address in order of operation. So I think that meeting series, which would really be next year, would help set the stage for that. But it's definitely something we need to do. It just all will be depending on council direction.
Completely appreciate that. And presumably, I'm guessing if things come up during this process that rise up to the surface, they'll be captured as part of that.
Well, what I would indicate is we'll capture it as things that we need to do onto that list. But yeah, anything that we identify, we'll keep a log, a ledger, right?
Yeah.
And we'll just keep saying these are additional things, and we'll bring it back to council for consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Landry.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of work you guys are done so far and will continue to do. I noticed on the map that you showed there's no parcels highlighted for Campbell Village. And you're talked numerous times about the area plan, but the actual boundaries of Campbell Village, I don't think there's any multifamily or I don't think they're going to apply, but you said that you're going to be looking at their standards. Yeah,
so correct. So this is actually one of those unique area plans where there's going to be really no impact. At least, again, as its first phase update. Eventually, we'll be addressing single family again later phase. But this targeted effort, we don't identify a need to update or even open the Campbell Village neighborhood plan at all.
Okay, and I noticed on the meeting schedule, you don't have a specific meeting with Stack or the Santa Moss area. If that area plan, there are some bigger areas in there that you might want to have a targeted meeting because that is such a big part of the city and they do have an organized neighborhood association. So I would recommend that. I'm having a problem with the word odds, the acronym odds,
Oh.
ODDS, at odds. It seems to be a negative connotation to the word. Is there another abbreviation that we're like ODS or something, but it seems like weird to have it called. I kept looking going odds. Are we at odds?
Well, one thing I'll say, we thought about a community engagement strategy. We thought most of the public would not understand objective standards. So we have pivoted to the term residential design standards, and we intend to use that going forward. Welcome any council feedback, but we are trying to move out of jargon and just use something the public can engage with.
Okay, just at odds was kept coming up for me. Okay, and then you didn't bring this up, but based on the documents that we've had come before us before, a lot of white on one side, fonts that aren't readable, light textured, like light colors and everything. So before you get started, think about, this is going to mostly be online. And so columnizing and having white space is like, when you put it online, is that really the format that we want? Yes, we'll probably have a book that's bound, but you maybe make less than 50 copies, right? So just think about ahead of time, font style, readability. I've been getting information lately about ADA and technology and the font sizes and all this. So just to kind of hone into you guys to take that under consideration from day one. Thank you.
I think, Stephen, that's all the questions we have up here. So why don't we move on to the next section?
There we go. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Stefan Pellegrini. I'm principal with Opticos Design. We're an urban design and planning and architecture firm located in Berkeley. And I'm very happy to be with you here in person tonight to share this information with you. As Stephen mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about our team and the approach to the work of applying the residential design standards in Campbell. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how we actually sort of approach this kind of process, working with other communities in the Bay Area. So Stephen mentioned our team members who actually are online this evening. Tony Perez is our senior associate, and he has been working closely with Rob and Stephen as our project manager on the project. And joined by his team members, Russell and Roger, who are also online. We actually, through our work helping various jurisdictions across California with objective design standards, have established a comprehensive toolkit of these standards. And so when we actually work with communities, it gives us an opportunity to customize that toolkit for that individual jurisdiction. And that means two things. It means that we get to go through a process of identifying what's special in Campbell and needs to be pulled from the area plans, from the existing regulatory framework, and incorporated into the residential design standards. But we also can bring a lot of best practices to the table that other communities have been struggling with as they've been trying to implement these objective design standards in their own community. We are a small business. We have about 21 people on staff. In our coding team, we tend to do these projects one at a time. So when Stephen and Rob came to us with a very aggressive schedule, we said, okay, this is what we're going to be doing in the next few months. As I mentioned, we've been using this approach statewide. We're currently working for the city of Santa Barbara. I'll tell you a little bit more about this later on in the presentation, but we actually have crafted residential design standards for 11 jurisdictions in Marin County simultaneously, which was sort of an enormous learning opportunity for us. We're also currently working in Mountain View on providing objective standards for their R3 zone, very extensive, and have in progress our adopted codes elsewhere, including Pittsburgh, Orinda, Corte Madera, Belvedere, and San Rafael. So our toolkit is actually organized around a palette of 8 zones that actually vary in intensity from least intense to sort of higher intensity, with the idea that we can actually use this palette of zones to apply to the environments in an individual community that are sort of the appropriate fit. And, not all cities have a real high intensity downtown. Some cities actually have multifamily neighborhoods that, we use the term house scale that actually are a very fine grained pattern. And we want to make sure that we have residential design standards that can accommodate the positive elements of these environments and be carried forward into new development. So we sort of start with this framework of 8 zones and standards. One of the key things about objective standards is we have to be really careful about their objective nature, that we can't rely on sort of consideration or discretion of anyone who in attempting to sort of interpret these standards. So we rely really very heavily on graphics and tables to the extent that we can. What you see on the screen here is how we approach the basic zoning standards for each zone district, and we compile that information into about 3 pages of graphics and tables, providing guidance for how buildings can be placed on lots, their height, where parking can go, how frontages and encroachments work. We get that sort of nailed down sort of in a very simple and straightforward manner. The code also provides supplemental standards, and there's sort of a broad range of these things that we can work closely with the community to customize and actually select that match sort of, I'll refer to the level of regulation that the city actually desires. These are sort of examples of specific standards for building types. We find this is really important if you have expectations around multifamily infill that is going into a neighborhood context. And it's really important to make sure that those buildings work and act and function like the neighboring houses in that neighborhood. We also have and address architectural standards, and this provides an opportunity to provide guidance for the sort of detailed exteriors of buildings that align with any particular desires for community character. And, this is sort of one place where communities sort of really express their sort of own interest in sort of what they sort of want to see in terms of architectural regulations. We're working with Santa Barbara right now, which of course has a sort of very long storied tradition of regulating almost everything. But there's other cities that actually prefer much more flexibility and creativity. And we sort of look to align these standards sort of with that local tradition that we might see. Stephen mentioned this process of test fits. Our scope actually includes time in both phases 2 and 3 to look at how the objective design standards would apply to 10 different sites in the community. We'll be working closely with staff to identify those sites. As Stephen mentioned, those actually might be housing element opportunity sites. We'll understand how the code is actually working when it's applied to these sites, how many units or yield actually might be come out of sort of applying those zones. And we use this work to actually refine the standards to make sure that they're going to be sort of working well for the community. This is sort of a really great process that we sort of like to go through. When we come back to you, this is the data and results of the test fit process is one of the things we'll be reporting on. So as Stephen mentioned, we're looking at 3 phases. It's a pretty aggressive timeline, I think sort of 8 to 9 months. And you will see me and others sort of multiple times during the process. We're sort of deep in phase one, have been meeting actually several times a week with staff to date, and we have a total of 6 in-person visits scheduled over the next 2 months, including 2 meetings next week when we'll be in the community. In phase 2, we'll actually focus on an initial draft of the administrative objective design standards. We'll be here about 8 times over the course of 5 months. And then that will also include 6 virtual working sessions with city staff. And then in phase 3, when we're working to sort of wrap up and assist the city with getting the objective design standards adopted, we will be here sort of an additional handful of times at the end of the project or early next year. As I mentioned, we sort of tend to do one project like this at a time. We're going to be working closely with staff. We've been doing that virtually, sharing a lot of sort of online tools. And these are just some examples of sort of the work that we produce to sort of get to the document that you actually saw on sort of some of the previous slides. We really enjoyed the opportunity to work iteratively. Stephen has actually done an enormous amount of work getting us ready for this process, and it's sort of been really wonderful to actually learn from him. And then the scope of work also includes a number of community meetings. I believe there's sort of our 3 described in the scope of work. We'll be working closely to assist Rob and Stephen with completing the community outreach plan. And then we will be here to sort of facilitate those meetings with the community as well. This is also something that we sort of really love to do, and we'll work to sort of help synthesize the feedback that comes from those meetings into input that actually could be incorporated into the objective design standards. This is just a graphic timeline that I sort of described before. You can sort of see with the diamond graphic sort of the places that will sort of be here in the community. You know, just really looking forward to sort of focusing on this project with everyone. So I'm going to take a step back and sort of spend a few minutes talking about a little bit more about our objective design standards toolkit and sort of how we sort of see it applying in Campbell as a starting point. I mentioned before we had this opportunity to sort of work with Marin County and 10 of their jurisdictions. This work started in 2019 and finished last year. And we've since been working with individual jurisdictions in Marin County to actually adopt customized versions of this toolkit. This was actually sort of a wonderful opportunity. What it meant on the surface is that we got to sort of analyze in detail about 780 parcels across 11 jurisdictions to understand how objective design standards could be applied. And it meant that we actually started to understand sort of a pretty broad range of environments where cities in the Bay Area are trying to put multifamily housing. And we had an opportunity to sort of test a lot of theories. Some failed, others passed, but we were able to sort of craft this initial toolkit based on this focus on this data, which has sort of really sort of enormously helped subsequent cities that we've worked with. We also went through a process of sort of tying these zone districts to the places in which they were trying to implement housing. And what we found is that this has been increasingly important for communities as they enter into their new RENA cycle and the number of housing units that they need to provide increases. Sometimes you're thinking about placing housing in areas of the community where the general plan actually may not be so clear about what the intention is, about what that place should be like. And so when we sort of crafted these zone districts, they are built in with some initial ideas and intention about placemaking, the kinds of places that we sort of want to emerge. So if you're thinking about housing in places where there is no housing today, like a strip mall, you can use this zoning to actually provide that intentional guidance about what that place should be like in the future. In Marin, we actually produced what is referred to as an atlas to do this work. And I like to refer to this, excuse me, this slide as a Rosetta Stone. It starts to tie the zone districts that are included in the toolkit at the bottom of the screen with the different kinds of places that communities have where they are trying to accommodate multifamily and mixed use residential housing. And that you can see that it sort of helps us narrow down how these zone districts can be applied within individual communities.
So in conclusion, the toolkit that we have actually is about 12 chapters of information. And when we work with individual communities, we work with them to do, as I mentioned, two things: select the content that they need and want that's relevant to their community, and then also work to incorporate the other information in their regulatory framework that they have that's important to include in this body of objective design standards. So we'll have an opportunity to discuss with you and with staff all of the topics that are listed here that sort of make up a good set of objective design standards. So that concludes my presentation for this evening, and I look forward to speaking with you about this and any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, are there questions for the consultant? Councilmember Lopez. You're it?
Could you, just broadly speaking, could you walk me through a little bit what a typical community meeting, how you would structure it to get the input? Because this is a lot of content. I appreciate the focus on communication and making it accessible. But how do you solicit the feedback that you get to hone in, for example, on the architectural standards?
That's a really good topic. And one of the things that we sort of need to think about sort of from this starting point is that when we're working to craft objective design standards for a community, it's important to engage the community and get their input, but it's different from a visioning process. You know, if you think about sort of a general plan or a corridor plan where you're asking high level questions about what you want this to be, this is actually sort of a process where it's more important to demonstrate that you're implementing what the general plan and the city's area plans actually already say about a place, but that you actually are working to make sure that there's a regulatory framework that is subjective. So the first thing we want to do is sort of be careful about that and sort of really refine how we want to sort of be asking questions of the community and what we sort of want to be asking them. And that's something that we will look forward to. What we've been doing for many of these projects is looking for the places where there are questions where it's important to sort of have the community focus. This question of architectural character is a big one because sometimes it's not that well defined and the community can actually express through visual preference or otherwise things that they actually want to see come out of sort of new projects. They also can express, and sometimes this is a little bit more easy for them, sort of what they don't like, sort of what's happening in sort of some existing projects, and there can be a discussion about sort of how that actually can change. An important starting point to that is the community survey that staff has actually been working on that sort of starts to initiate a discussion about architectural character and sort of what's liked and sort of what's not liked. Another thing that we sort of found is that sometimes there's sort of clarity in an area plan or sort of in another document about sort of what we want to see on a site or in sort of a particular neighborhood, but it actually might not be 100% definable for sort of how you kind of want to create objective design standards. So there could be particular questions about the test fits or opportunity sites where we can actually say, well, the general plan says that this should be 4 to 6 stories or 2 to 3 stories. And now let's sort of talk about sort of what it means to nail that down, to actually get sort of an objective zoning envelope that can be described. And we can sort of start to extract some preferences out of that as well.
I appreciate that. And I like what I'm hearing on visuals and how to really parse out in a language the community understands. Just a definitional question. I saw microscale analysis. I think what does that mean?
Sure. So we use that term when we actually are focusing in particular about groups of individual parcels. And what we look at there is the dimensions of the parcels and what you can actually fit on them when you start to think about setbacks and other things. Zoning is like a mystery sometimes. Like, if you ask any jurisdiction, like, where did this standard come from? Sometimes it goes way back and it's not 100% clear what the origin of that is. What we often find when we're applying these odds is that they're actually, we refer to them as limiting factors. There might be things in the zoning ordinance that actually are not overt at all and probably were not intentional, that are actually sort of limiting development or actually might be impacting how development happens on lots. When we do the microscale analysis, we can help uncover a lot of that And so it means when we put something new that's forward, we can clean up any of those things that actually might be unintentionally creating obstructions to development, or even sort of creating sort of bad development patterns that actually aren't liked.
And how do you use what you glean from that process? Do you extrapolate from that to other similar sized parcels, or what, because you can't do every single
Yeah,
one.
we'll do a lot of work to look for
Uh-huh.
patterns in the community, and sort of where, and there's always the site where things don't work and sort of things that are really particular. And we've already been learning about where those are in the community, but there's a lot of things where you can find repeating patterns, and you can understand with some certainty that if you apply a standard at one location, it will be very effective across a broad range of parcels.
Okay, I'll stop there for now.
Vice Mayor Bybee?
So I had a question. I believe I understood you to say that your scope includes up to 10 test sites. And in our report, there's 5 that have been identified. How do you, what's the priority, or how are additional test sites selected? Is that through the process, through public outreach?
Yeah, we expect to work iteratively with staff to sort of determine that. We want to sort of get a broad cross section of what's going to be applied here, so that we know that we're meeting sort of the full range of environments. But I'm assuming that in the coming weeks, we're going to be determining that information.
Yeah, we saw it as a two-step process. So to start, this is iterative, develop the standards, see if they fit. And so rather than do it all in one setting, use 5 sites up front, and then as they're customized, come back and do another set of sites. So that was the thought on the approach on parsing those into 2 buckets.
Thank you.
So seeing no other questions, we'll open up for public comment at this point. And any from the public in the chamber or online will be welcome to speak for 2 minutes. Any questions or statements? Yeah, please come. We don't have any cards, so I'll ask you to just come up one by one. We'll do the chamber first. If you identify yourself, please, that would help.
Mayor Sullivan, and I'm here. 2 things that I want to touch on really quickly. Thank you. Is number 1, the objective designs. I've realized that other cities are doing this, and this is something that's actually happened, as 20 years ago. I think one of the things that staff and the council have to be cognizant of is to make sure that there's still flexibility for change, because the one thing that Campbell doesn't want is the same kind of building at the 96 locations, or there's a lot of parcels that are part of the housing element. And so you don't want just one style of townhome or one style of 5-story kind of apartment, because it looks too rote, if you will. So that's just one standpoint. My next point was on the test fit sites. One of the sites is 251 Llewellyn. I'm sure some of you remember me, kind of coming up here about a year or so ago. And at that time, I showed 3 different densities. I showed a low density of about 70 units on the site, which is about 12 units an acre. Another one that was at about 16, 17 units an acre. And a third one at the time that was high density, that was at about 25 units an acre. And in the staff report, I see that they're looking at doing a test fit site at 35 units an acre, which is much higher than what I think myself and what the neighbors, were under the impression of going forward. So I don't know if it was just a typo. I didn't get a chance to talk to Rob or Steven today, but I think in the EIR, it's capped at 25. So it might have been a typo, but I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in the chamber wishes to speak? Please come up.
Hi, good evening, Scott Reese. Just a couple of comments, I think. I'm happy that we're actually looking at this. My question is, once these policies are adopted, how long are they going to be in effect before we address them again? Because we seem to have been stuck for numerous years with the existing ones. So is there some flexibility in that? Maybe if something changes that we could readdress these at some point, or is it another 20 years or something like that? A couple of other comments were, I understand you asked the gentleman about single family, and I think that's such a huge part of our city that we should at least get that on some sort of calendar and not just push it down the line a little bit. That's just my own comment. The other thing is, you had mentioned bringing in maybe Stack or getting their opinion. I think that if we do that, then every user group is going to want to have their opinion heard. So I'd rather just leave it the way we are, which is inviting people to come and then getting their opinion that way versus going to a single user group and having them say, because they may not represent that entire community, but themselves. One other thing, in regards to when we're looking at density and stuff like that, sometimes in urban areas, lending is quite easy for lenders and stuff like that. But when we get into more of the open areas, I'm going to call this more of an open, more suburban areas. When we go super high, lending becomes an issue, or mixed use becomes an issue for lending. So I would just say, let's look at that from a standpoint as well. So we can encourage people to come by and live here versus having no lending available to them. Also within that, a lot of times when we're talking mixed use, if we're within an HOA and the mixed use is part of that, they may have control over that entire HOA because of how big they are versus the tenants in that area. I know that's happened in San Francisco before, where the major tenant has say over everything and they dominate that. And it's not really good for the people that actually live there. So, but I applaud you guys for looking at this. The flexibility was a huge thing that I heard, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Scott. Next.
Thank you for letting me speak and being proactive. Thank you for letting me speak and being proactive on this, because my wife and I, we love to travel. And what we're seeing is almost an epidemic of dreary architecture in the country. And I'm glad you're being proactive on this. The saddest part, recently on a trip, we went to New England. And if you go to New Haven, Connecticut, you imagine this pretty place, you can see obviously people, greedy developers, I'm calling them. They used to be really great, but they're all building the same looking buildings. They're all boxy, dreary looking things. You'd see it reminds you of the Soviet Union or something back in the 50s. I spent a lot of time working with the city on the Winchester and Campbell master plans and all. And we had great ideas then. We wanted, some roof articulation, a variation of building heights, respect to the character and the history of the city. I think those are all important. What I'm worried about are developers going to come in here, come up with whatever they want. They're going to give you the same looking building you're seeing all over San Jose and all over the Bay Area. And if you go traveling in the country, you're going to see them all pop up all over. They're basically 4-story, 5-story buildings, right? They're kind of stick boxy construction, flat tops. I don't know what they do when it rains a lot. I guess the water's going to come down. But anyway, please don't allow that here. We went through a lot. We spent a lot of money undergrounding the utilities on Winchester and Campbell. We did a lot of landscaping. Let's get quality buildings here. We know a cheap, efficient, dreary building when you see it. I mean, it's pretty obvious. And let's respect H.W. Weeks, some of the architecture he did. Lastly, my wife and I come from Illinois. What we love about California is you have some beautiful architecture here. Don't destroy it. We love the craftsmen, the Mediterranean style. Pasadena is a great example of that, but don't destroy it by these greedy developers.
Thank you. Before you go, would you like to give us your name just in case somebody wants to follow up with you?
Joseph Gimignani. I think I spoke with is it Tracy?
Okay, just so we have it in case they wanted to follow up.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Council. My name is Raja Pallela, 1216 West Hacienda Avenue. I live in the St. Thomas neighborhood. Great pointers by speakers earlier, Jim about repetitive designs and Scott about neighborhood committees not representing the neighborhood. As much as I actively take participation in Stack, I meet people who have been living in the neighborhood for 20 years who never heard what Stack is. So I think that's a great point. Page 6.2 says prioritize. Like the title says prioritizes multifamily and mixed use development, but the text says small lot single family. So I'm trying to get a understanding of are we going for single families or is the focus on multifamily and mixed use? The other thing is 1/3 of the city right now is in that St. Thomas area neighborhood plan. I mean, 1/3 of city cannot be a neighborhood plan. I mean, it's not a 1/3 of any city is not a neighborhood. So that needs a lot of revision. It's created in like 1993, which is 30 years old. The maximum building height cannot exceed 28 feet or 2.5 floors. But if you are going for small lot, single family homes, you see all the new constructions happening. The only way to give good space for these young families is to go 3 floors. So those kinds of things need to change. 3 floors is a very common new design nowadays. Also, the setbacks are irrelevant now that are specified in the St. Thomas neighborhood plan because the ADU law anyway, says setbacks reduces for 4 feet. But whereas the St. Thomas neighborhood plan says even for accessory buildings, they set based on the height and things. So I think they are not valid anymore. So that needs a revision. Also, St. Thomas neighborhood plan asks for architectural review, but architecture review is subjective. I might like something and someone else might like something else. So that's one thing. Also, designs from 30, 50 years old ago, like the elevations and stuff, those designs does not interest young demographic buyers anymore. So I think this process should leave room for modern and contemporary designs. I would request remove covered parking requirements for single family homes, as long as there is a driveway should be okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Raja. Anyone else in the chamber first? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody online? I have to flip back to the Zoom call here. Let's see. I don't see anybody with their hand up.
I don't either. Is there anybody online that would like to speak? Okay. I think
I
we're
don't
good.
see anybody. Okay. Then let me just get to here. Bear with me. We go between screens here. We'll bring it back to the council for discussion. And Rob, let me ask you at this point, you want feedback on the work plan, the principles, and I say the project schedule. We'll get to outreach and engagement strategy, but just from that point now would be a good time to get feedback from the council. Correct?
That's correct. Everything you've heard to date.
Okay, to this point. Who would like to start? Councilwoman Landry?
What's wrong with me today, but I'm having a hard time hearing again. So the only part we're talking about right now is.
So we've talked about the overview, the work plan and guiding principles and the project schedule. We have not gotten to the community engagement or discussion about the ad hoc committee. So that'll be next.
Yeah, that's my comments go to the next time.
Okay, so let's hold that. Councilmember Lopez.
Yeah, Rob, I've actually, if I can start with a question. How, and I understand why we are where we're at in the process and all the challenges with it full well. So kudos to the approach and trying to address that. I guess, how do you balance this process with, I heard during the presentation from the consultant that they're going to look to the general plan for guidance and, what's in there for what to do. So how do you square that given where we are in that process?
Great question. So Campbell is in a unique place. Before I start, I did want to enter into the record in response to Mr. Sullivan. I know you wanted me to follow up. That was an error in the report. It's not 35 units per acre for the Llewellyn site. It's 25 units per acre. I was looking to Stephen. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure that was in the record.
Thank you.
So we are in an unusual spot. We're going through a general plan update. We're going through a housing element update. A lot of the majority, I'd say, of the mixed use multifamily housing is coming out of new standards and new densities. We're taking your direction to date so far on where and at what densities and planning for them. No, by no means the council has locked into those. We did want this to be iterative. So, I guess I'll answer this way. This will help, I think, with some of the questions the council had. You've planned and shown densities in certain areas, 75 units per acre, 60, 45. A lot of the concerns were, well, maybe that is too dense for that area. Well, maybe that's near single family. We want to come back and think about maybe shaving down some of those densities. I'll say one advantage of doing this now is it puts everything together. What you'll have over the next couple of months is not just a theory of 75 units per acre. you'll have these residential design standards and these test fits. So what Opticos will do is go in and create a design standard around 75 units per acre. They'll show it in the prune yard and the fry site, and they'll try it at these different densities. And that will really tell you two things. One is that the right density for these areas? And two, will it mitigate some of the issues? I think we heard from the council. Well, I'm really sensitive that it might be too big and too massing. So I think to answer your question, we think, number one, we don't have clear guidance from the general plan, given there's a general plan update. Two, we have broad direction on where to go. But I think the one advantage out of all of this, by doing it together, is both processes can educate each other. It's very fast, and that's why we thought you might want to think about a subcommittee. But we really think it's helpful that the end product, you will have a complete package. It's all at once, but at the end, you will have the densities, the general plan, and the zoning standards to implement it. So I hope that answers the question. And again, it's a delicate dance, and we don't have all the answers yet, but as we roll out these work products, we hope it will actually educate the council more on both ends, on these standards and the housing densities going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I understand it's a challenge, and I appreciate you're trying to address that best we can. My feedback for what we've seen so far is largely positive. I mean, I agree with the multiple commenters who are concerned about just having the same cookie cutter designs. And so when I see some of those pictures and getting too limited, it makes me nervous. I'm sure we'll hear that a lot as we go through the community outreach process. But in terms of where we are and just trying to almost triage a bit and prioritize, I appreciate the approach that staff is taking here.
Councilmember Gibbons?
Okay, so first off, thank you very much for the presentation. I did follow from the staff report and figured out where you were going to go and why you were doing this. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I will offer that I'm an architect, so I have a little different perspective on some of the language and the terms. So if I misspeak or something, it's because I have a preconceived idea. So feel free to educate me if you're thinking something different. I have been, and I am appreciative of what you're saying and doing. If I sound a little bit frustrated and nervous, it's not personal to this effort. It's because we've needed these objective standards since January of 2018. And we've talked and we feel with staff, and staff has acknowledged that the city is in a very precarious position by not having objective standards. So I'm anxious that we work through this. Stephen, I chuckled when you said something about your workload. You do have a significant workload, you in the department. So appreciate what you're going to be going through. The other thing that the gentleman from Opticos said, and you saved yourself from getting in deep water with me. You talked about a cool toolkit, customizing, recognizing what makes Campbell special. And that's the name of the game for, I think, many, many people in our community. And the council, while we've been going through the general plan update process on the housing element update process, have also said that our goal is to provide housing. Our goal is to provide affordable housing, but we are also equally balanced with all of those times and decisions is Campbell is Campbell. It is unique to all of us who love living here, who deliberately came here. It has key elements like our downtown. We recognize we have to change, but we can change thoughtfully. And I'm optimistic that the process that's being discussed here tonight will take us there. The gentleman who spoke about not making things repetitive or cookie cutter is really, really important. Our community is not cookie cutter. And we have some great assets and some great challenges to increase the housing stock that we're being legally required to do. Even when we want to do it, it is terribly constrained by law. So it's a challenge, and I'm looking forward to working through that. Don't want, I think the word, I always get it mixed up, but I think we have to be careful. We don't want to get too prescriptive. We don't want to say something has to be this, this, and this. I don't know how you can make the term articulated facades, not articulated roof lines, objective, but there's things like that. And flexibility, I don't know how we can work the word flexibility into some of this, but that's the things that come to my mind. Okay, so trying to be specific to what was said, I do think definitions are going to be important. I agreed with someone who found in the text the reference to single family. I think that was also a little bit of a typo because we've explicitly excluded that. So I think we need to just clarify that. I didn't see, and so these are more questions, not necessarily for tonight, but to give you some thoughts, is we've had a significant debate about mixed use. And I don't quite see how the definition of mixed use fits into your categories of residential. So I think we have to be thoughtful of that. We also have to be thoughtful that we have, correct me if I'm wrong again, one housing unit for every 1.6 jobs, right? Okay, that means we've got too many jobs. Now, I'm not saying that I'm saying that tongue in cheek. We have to be careful that we don't create more vacant retail space or more vacant office space. So when you're talking about residential and multifamily, that doesn't always mean that there's some kind of commercial space on the ground level. Sometimes multifamily needs to go to the ground, and there are great examples around our area here that accomplish that. So I don't want to exclude something just because we haven't challenged our definition. Okay. In terms of parking, I appreciate everybody, and some people in particular are adamant that parking is a problem. We overpark. I would offer, because I've been around the city and involved for 25 years, there was always a reason for having the parking standards we currently have. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be revisited, but I'm a little uncomfortable with what I see in the report here for recommendations. To me, they're a little oversimplified. They don't recognize context of Campbell. So for example, on Railway, they built a huge project, and the only way they could justify, I shouldn't say that, there was a big justification debate. They actually ripped out a brand new road, portions of a brand new road, brand new park strip, brand beautiful new trees that had been in for 10 years, moved the sidewalk, did everything just to get them another 8 or 10 parking spaces for their convenience. I thought that was a terrible community result because the trees on that whole boulevard no longer match. I mean, it was just, I think, very sad. So we have narrow streets. You have to remember, narrow streets don't facilitate parking other than regular neighborhood convenience parking and occasional parking. I do not think that parking on the street is a right of a developer and their tenants because they didn't pay for it. We paid for it with our taxes. So I think it's has to be very carefully recognized what the street widths are here and whether they can in fact accommodate the extra parking. We have other examples of apartment complexes that over solicit their tenants instead of having one tenant in a 1-bedroom or 2 tenants in a 2-bedroom. They have 3 or 4 tenants, all of whom have cars. We have a significant problem of parking in the neighborhoods. We have them parking in our street, in our public parking lots. So to say that our standards are too high, you need to recognize the reality of the physical constraints in the city. And you need to look at, can you, if you want to have reduced parking, can you have a stipulation that there can only be 1 car per unit? I don't know if anything that's possible, but it seems like the other side of the coin saying there won't be any because you're not going to use any because you're going to use public transit doesn't make sense to me. We have some decent public transit here in Campbell, but frankly, it's not very functional. It takes you to the downtown San Jose and Arena and Googleplex probably, but that's it. It's not functioning. So I worry that, again, state law and all kinds of other things influence that, but I think we have to be careful. So I'm not comfortable with the statements in the report as is, because it is not contextual enough for our particular situations. I do think we need to find a way to protect our downtown because that's a core of our identity. And I use protect for lack of a better phrase. I was a little concerned about your 8-zone templates. I'm not sure how you'll get that to work with some of the thoughtfulness that was done for the Winchester master plan and the East Campbell Ave master plan. So I'll be curious to see how that goes. Let's see. Also, I think it'll be a challenge for your templates to recognize the magnitude of the change in the zoning. It says in there it's 27 units an acre. We're now talking 40, 60, 75, whatever the numbers are. And most critically, and I know we can't deal with this in the RENA numbers and the housing element per se, but I believe every multifamily project that's been done in Campbell in the last 5 years has used density bonus. And the density bonus has increased from a maximum, I think, of 35% to now a maximum of 50%. So when you're talking 75 units an acre, you're going up to what, 110 units an acre or something like that? That's significant. So I don't quite see, and I'm looking forward to the discussion of how you can help us address the impact of the density bonus types of things. Okay. All right, and I'll just run through my notes. That was reacting to the presentation. I'm just going to quickly run through my notes that I wrote down reviewing the staff report, if I may. Yeah, this single family lot question popped up. Okay. So I have been for a long time, and staff I think would agree with me on this as well as others. I have for a long time been supportive of single overlays, objective standards. I've talked a lot about, can we have a standard for open space? Can we have a standard for private open space and public open space or development open space? Can we have simple definitions about landscaping? I'm sure there are other things I'll think of, but I think doing one overlay and one definition is a great place to start and also very effective to make this schedule that you're proposing happen. There's a lot of validity to this one booklet approach. But I think there's a lot of topics that what you've got in the staff report may not cover. And I'll see if I can find my notes. Just one more moment and I'll let you take it back. There's a section here with figure, oops. Okay, that one I'd already spoke to. Sorry, I'll just try and get through it. All right, I'll leave it go at that. And then if there's some other loose ends, I'll come back.
Councilwoman Landry.
Yes, thank you. I want to kind of follow up with what Liz just was talking about. First thing is definitions. I already brought up the word odds and how that connotation of that. Rob and I have had multiple conversations about the word urban. He came from the county and I think Morgan Hill, and I think it's LAFCO that says you're either rural or you're urban. Well, we're not urban. You say that word to a lot of people in Campbell and they are going to come unglued and throw tomatoes at you. probably, seriously. I sent an email once to Brian and Rob and said, are we a metropolitan area? Are we a metropolis? What is the word to talk about congregation of building, congregation of people, density without using the word urban? So I'm challenging you to not use that word. I heard it once in the presentation. And to really define, are we suburban? We're not necessarily rural, but to me, urban is downtown New York, downtown San Francisco, and even downtown San Jose. Now, we're going to have some pockets over by Fry's and Bascom and Hamilton where we're going to have the higher density, the taller buildings. Maybe that one pocket, and I'm stretching maybe, that might be part of urban, but the rest of the city is not. And I really want to get away from that word. Don't put on your document urban planning kind of stuff, please. And what are we and what words can we use? I mean, metropolitan, whatever, I think would be helpful, especially when we go out to the community and really wanting to engage them and feel like we're really hearing them. We are a special place. We are Campbell. We want to be Campbell. We want to stay a small town. So, okay, enough on that. I concur with Liz on the parking. I did not really agree to, there was bullets underneath there about the parking reduction. I cannot emphasize enough of how important parking is to our neighborhoods and or the lack of parking. And like Liz was saying, you have a 1-bedroom where it was originally for one person and there's 2 people, or a 2-bedroom have 4 people. They all have a car. The parking lot in the development has 1 parking per unit. They're out on the streets. Then the people who have a residential house that want to have someone guest park in front of their house, they travel blocks to try to find where to park. And I know with the state requirements, there's certain buildings that the parking is pre-dictated to a lot, to an extent. We do not have a good mass transit system. Bus routes can change. There is nothing in VTA that ties these developments to a bus route. We're losing bus routes. Light rail is a single line. We're to end. There's one place to go, and that's towards San Jose. So reducing the size of the parking space, to me, goes with commercial development. Maybe you go down to a compact of 8 or a universal at 8.6. But the size of it is going to matter. I know on a driveway, I think you said it's longer, like 20 feet instead of 18 or something. I forget the numbers, but be really careful on especially street parking. Trying not to get shorter than what we have right now. I think the driveways are 20 and the parallels are 20, but so size of spaces, the functionality of it, the neighborhood impact, and then I know parking permit is in here about we had San Jose build a project. They limited their parking. Next thing you know, our whole entire neighborhood has no parking, and we had to implement a parking program, which now the city's having to manage that, permits, enforcement, and all that. Going back to definitions, I'm a landscape architect, so we have landscape areas and we have open space. And it always kind of bothers me that a landscape planting strip on a drawing is, we have X number of square feet of open space. Well, no, you really have landscape areas or dirt areas, and you have the park or the functional area, to me, is what kind of goes under open space. So I know some of these definitions, like that one, probably has the bigger connotation as the planning profession, but people want to know how big a park is or how much functional open space they have versus little parking landscape strips. So when it comes later to evaluate it, let's see, I think those were my items. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Bybee?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I think it's a good approach. I like the guiding principles. I think those are good principles to move forward with. And I would actually add a guiding principle, an overarching one that says keep it moving so that we do meet our targets and we do meet our deadlines and we do come up with a project or a product that we're all satisfied with. So I say that tongue in cheek, but I do really want to stress that we keep it moving. As far as the standards, I would like to see standards that are developed that provide some flexibility and options for residents. I don't want it to, I want to retain the charm and character of Campbell, and you've heard that, and I'm sure you will hear that through the community engagement. I don't want to become a one look fits all or the cookie cutter version of what others have said. And I also do have a concern about the parking standards. I understand that the parking standards do need to be looked at and evaluated, but I think we need to be also cautious about reducing or eliminating parking and the unintended consequences that will occur from that. The reality of is we do not have a public transportation system that is really viable and that moves people from point A to point B. It's not a very efficient system. Even for the properties that are located within the downtown area and have availability of the light rail, it's not that efficient. And the reality is people aren't going to give up their cars just because their development that they're moving into doesn't allow on-site parking. So we have to be mindful of the unintended consequences that occur from that. But other than that, I'm looking forward to the process.
Thank you. I'll add some comments and maybe a couple questions in, and I too like the guiding principles. I like the fourth guiding principle, but I mean, just because the way you spelled it out, it's the proper way to do it to engage with the public and move things forward. So I like to see that specified. Just to clarify a couple of things from the questions you had. I think it was Mr. Reese asked about how long do these things go? So some of this is spurred by state law changes and things like that. So we don't know what's coming down, but absent those changes or some demand that we have to do something, what typically is the period in which we would go back and start looking at things and tweaking and maybe making anywhere from minor to larger changes, if not pushed by the state?
A lot of variables.
Sure.
I think this is so new, right? And this will be it'll be a pretty big departure in our zoning standard. And reflecting on jurisdictions I've come from elsewhere, I think at minimum, a standard practice would be once adopted. Well, two things will happen. We'll move on to the next phase. And to Councilmember Lopez's point, a lot of things probably will come up in this that we'll put in a second phase with the single family. But with everything, when you try something new, you need the ability to come back and do some tweaks. I think at minimum, we would put in a reflection back at 6 months to a year and just report back on what's working, what's not, and provide the option for the council to come in and do modifications, something like that.
Okay. And you just mentioned single family. I think that the comment was made about, not kicking that down the road, but I think if I heard right, it's clearly not in the first phase, but in the second phase, when council will determine the priorities, it could be, in fact, the number one priority of phase two. It might not be, but I mean, that's where we are right now. So today we can't say anything other than it's not in the initial phase, but it is in a future phase, maybe sooner than later. And that'll be determined by council, it'll be determined with public input.
Correct.
Okay. I agree with the speakers who said we keep this as a general public invite. So the problem of inviting individual groups is who do you invite? The bigger issue is taking, Raja here who lives in San Tomas. If we invite everybody in San Tomas, then you will reach the people who are in Stack. If you invite the people in Stack, you may or may not reach the gentleman here or somebody else. So it's got to go the other way, I think, and make it broad. I think it's important to do that, and that's for every neighborhood, but there's other special interest groups as well. We should figure out how to reach everybody, but I think we reach everybody by reaching all residents. People in those groups are residents, so that's what I would do. With regard to the comment about maybe not always needing mixed use, I would just qualify it on two things. One is obviously whenever we take out, if we're looking at taking out commercial, then we always want to look at the base we're losing. The services and the tax base. And the second part of that is it also depends on what that mixed use is, because if you put in services for the people that are going to live in that property, that's a benefit and people need those services. If you're putting in professional office and those people perhaps want to live here, you're creating a bigger demand for housing by putting in a mixed use. So I would just say focus on the mixed use, on services that for the existing people, but also the people that are coming in to use that. The more people can use services right in their locale, right? The less traffic we have, the less need to go outside. And you start seeing projects like Main Street in Cupertino or so, where all of a sudden you have a grocery store and a hotel and restaurant, and maybe or a mini Target, you can stay right there. The parking, I agree very much with the Vice Mayor. It's a hard balance, right? That's a really critical balance. We don't have good public transportation. We just don't. Cars are not going to go away. And if you restrict too far, as Councilwoman Landry said, then you're going to start triggering the need for parking permit zones, which once you have it in one neighborhood is going to spread out. The whole neighborhood is going to be covered like that. So it doesn't work. It doesn't work at zero parking or almost no parking unless you have those zones. And we responded to San Jose, but we were able to respond fortunately in an area where it kind of had natural borders of San Tomas and Hamilton and Winchester. So it didn't require it to spread to other neighborhoods. Be careful about that. That being said, I would just qualify all that with, if our standards are so strict that they preclude somebody moving forward with a project, we can entitle all the projects we want, but they don't get built, we lose on that. So that's a balance I don't envy you figuring out, but going too far is going to impact the entire neighborhood around it. And that's a disaster because you only fix it with permits and they just keep spreading. And being so strict that you lose the projects, we lose the housing. So good luck. That's all the comments I had. Do any other comments here?
Thank you. Good discussion. I think we're hopefully providing you with the thoughts that have been building over time. One of my favorite ones is climate action. And we have building codes that are changing and moving forward. The city is looking at a REACH code update. So there's a lot of things like that happening, but there's also other things and respectful of the cost. There's programs about EV parking and getting funding for, so this I appreciate is getting into the weeds, but just to give you some of the background, EV parking in multifamily is at a significant loss, and there's money out there now to do that. So we also, I mean, it's a way of encouraging recycling, a resale of EV vehicles. There's a lot of things that we're going to be working with. The IRA legislation that just came through has some phenomenal potential. We haven't talked a lot about water conservation. We're going to create a lot of hardscape, be it roofs or whatever, that can be addressing the collection and reuse of water. So that kind of thing should also be considered. Another in the weeds thing is we have made one project with, I think it's a 10 by 50 balcony requirement. Well, half the balcony is filled with their air conditioning unit. So it's virtually unusable. So little things like that. Oh, there's one other project with open space, and I appreciate Councilwoman Landry's comment. The definition of what counts as open space. I believe we have a designation here in Campbell that says it doesn't count sidewalks and doesn't count park strips. But what people do with what the space left over that's open space, it doesn't contribute to the residents or to the city. And in a couple places, we have quote unquote open space, and it shrunk during the development of the site, and they ended up landscaping the whole thing. So there's absolutely no usable open space. It's there visually, but not functionally. So those things really do make a difference. And it, as Councilwoman Landry said, it comes down to definitions. Thanks.
Councilmember Lopez.
First, I'll just say totally second the opportunity and resources out there for EV parking. I'll just add a plug that the Bay Area Air Quality District both has incentives and funds and some new policies in place to support that. So I'm happy to follow up on that. I actually wanted to clarify maybe a question that I had. Councilmember Gibbons, you mentioned, I think in reference to one of the speakers, that it may have been a typo, but somewhere in here is single family housing. I think I caught the same thing. I just wanted to make sure we clarified that. Is this the one on packet page 6?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So we do
Okay.
indicate an intention to cover small lot, single family, multifamily, and mixed use housing development. This is one of those terms, like I was giving an example of earlier, like FAR, lot coverage, we want to get away from. Locally, we define small lot, single families like townhomes, like attached row housing. So we might use some other term like row housing or duplexes or fourplexes to kind of describe what we're talking about there. But it's those divisions of land, small lots that serve single family homes as a kind of like a connected unit. The idea is this update's applying to multi-family development projects. So if you did a 8-9 unit subdivision, is all one big block building. That's what we're talking about.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen. You look like you had something to say, so I just wanted to make sure I got back to that. Does that address your question, Councilmember? Okay.
Your mic's off.
Mine is on the page 4 of 14. There's a table and it referenced single family excluded. And then down below, I think there's
It's
another
six,
place
six.
where it says facilitate development of single lot, single family.
That's
Yeah,
the same,
so-
that's the same document. He's on page 6 of the packet. She's on 4 or 14 of the report.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
it's the same, it's the same thing.
It's the same page.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank
Councilwoman Landry?
I'm going to follow up on climate action and the REACH codes and what's happening to our environment and our drought situation. How much of this could include things like tree shade standards? I know Mountain View, you have to calculate the percentage of the tree shade over the parking lot and growth at 75, 100 feet. And is anything regarding tree and landscaping going to be part of these standards? That's a question.
Well, I'll start, and Stephen and Stefan might have some. To the extent we delve into the open space and landscaping, I think it's our job to make that clear and address that. I think I'll defer the rest of the question of Stefana's history on tree shading and if this is a priority of the council.
Okay, and then it also is, the comment was mentioned about the flat roofs, where does the water go? The Valley Water District has programs about gray water harvesting, rainwater harvesting. We haven't really seen that in projects that I've seen here come forward. Other cities are almost mandating, where's your tank for your rainwater storage? So be very cognizant of the environmental issue, things like the trees, the rainwater, where's it go, permeable soil, percolation, that kind of stuff.
So before Stefan answers, I'll just say one thing. A lot of great ideas in there, and I think the intent and the comments came up on this last night on a project that goes through an entitlement stage and then it gets building permits, and if you don't catch it, the design changes. I think the objective of all of this is, hey, make it objective, make it clear, people know what it is, address all the issues that we'll address. And to the extent some things that come in the building stage, you should go upstream, like what does the fire department require? What's an ADA access and gray water? I think we're going to try and do that to the extent possible. The only caution I have is we do only have 6 months. So to the extent some of these get really thorny and you can't make them objective to adhere to our principles, I just say it'll be hard for us to swallow everything. So there might be some judgment calls. If some of these get really hard to objectify, we might put them in a phase 2.
So I would encourage, I think Liz calls it a parking list. I called it a bin list. Things that are not going to be addressed in the 6-month time period, and keep a running list so that after we're done, we still know what things we should be adding. You talked about coming back in 6 months to a year, but having this list of, okay, Susan brought up shade. We don't do that in the first 6 months, but as we move forward, and don't forget this later on. So I think Liz calls it a parking list or something.
Okay, thank you. So Rob or Steve, you want to take us now into the community outreach and engagement strategy, and that would include the potential ad hoc. So
Absolutely. And one last thing, I'll just a quick response. Got 3 pages of notes. I do have a pretty clear council consensus on some caution flags on the parking. I'll say staff's observation is 6 months objective standards, not our job in this to totally reimagine parking from the ground up. I think it was our sense to go towards what makes projects feasible, industry standard in areas where the state has already weighed in, but not to reimagine parking from the ground up. I just don't think we have the time. So hearing your sensitivity, but wanting to come back with us saying we're just trying to hit to something that's practical in the next 6 months.
Yes.
And I'll just add one other thing, because I heard it mentioned a few times, is the concept at the point of definitions within this toolkit, the document that we're going to be creating, it's going to have its own entire set of definitions, which support all unique terms and that we're using within that document. Also, not only to implement what we're trying to create here, but also to not impact everything else, which we're not, like the single family and there's other commercial stuff, which we want to retain those definitions intact as they exist today, and have this new booklet to guide multifamily mixed use housing moving forward.
You're telling us there's gonna be a whole new set of acronyms now to follow.
Yeah, we'll try to reduce the jargon. Okay, sorry, going back. So just recap where we're at in the meeting. So we've gone through all the items here in gray, including presentation by Opticos, and we stopped for questions. Up next, we've got our committee outreach and engagement plan and the creation of the ad hoc committee. So on committee engagement strategy, so we have doing a lot of things here. So first and foremost, as we mentioned earlier, we're trying to rebrand this whole update from ODDS or odds, and there's terminology that won't resonate well with the public, to residential design standards, which we think will make more sense. Even the email which went out today has reflected that. We're already trying to use that terminology and switch it everywhere. We've already started to have it because we recognize it's a better way of reaching our public. Additionally, we're going to be doing broad community outreach, including through social media. That's like your traditional channels, LinkedIn, Nextdoor, Facebook, and we have a dedicated objective standards website, or residential design standards website. It already slipping there a little bit. And we are also maintaining an email list. We're pretty much building on the email list of contacts we'd already collected and generated through the general plan and housing element update. We also just released a community survey. I've got a slide right after this one that shows you a little sneak preview of it. It's also on our dedicated website. Also went out an email blast earlier today. We're going to be doing a series of community meetings as well as stakeholder workshops. So those are actually going to be structured, dedicated meetings. There's going to be broad reach, inviting everyone in the community to attend. Everyone's invited to both meeting sets. And but in addition to that, we're also going to be looking at going out to the community where it makes sense and where we're welcome. So if there's a typical meeting group that meets at a religious facility or school property or what have you, we'll be willing to go out there. But we're also providing we're making ourselves available for on-call appointments. So we're using a tool through Microsoft Bookings that allows people to kind of pick a time, pick a date, that they can have an on-call or on-demand appointment with us as well. And we just facilitate a Zoom meeting, like a Microsoft Teams meeting that way. Additionally, we're going to be, right around the corner here, we're going to be attending the farmers market. I think it's on the 21st, if I'm not mistaken. And just as another way of letting people know, hey, we're doing this big kickoff, please participate, get distributing materials. We're going to have a fun exercise. We're going to have like a board up where people push pins in their favorite architectural designs and styles. And they circle the map and indicate where in the community they think that there's distinct architectural character, in what way and how. And in addition, throughout this whole update, we're going to be doing planning commission and city council meetings, which will also be major landmarks and check-ins. So as I mentioned, this is kind of like your sneak preview of the community survey. So we did assemble images that represent housing at various scales, including 2-story, 3-story, I think it's 4 to 5, and from 5 to 7, I believe, on the high end. And including the survey, we included 3 local Campbell examples in each range where we have it. Obviously, in the higher end of the range, we don't really have that many great representative examples, so we had to reach outside the community more. But the idea here is we're providing combinations of local examples and then practices that you might see exhibited by other communities in various types, like various types of contemporary and other types of architectural styles. We had to drop it from the survey, but we have an intention of having like a public upload feature where individuals could suggest their own images if they really think there's a great housing project or something that they've seen mixed use projects in other community that they'd love to see have come here. we'll have a feature that will allow people to contribute their own images, and we'll be doing that throughout as well. So in terms of the ad hoc committee, and that I think we reiterated it a few times here, we have 7 months to complete the update. As staff, we're recommending that we form a subcommittee, the city council or planning commission, to provide closer support and to act as a bridge between staff and the commission and council between meetings. So in terms of commitment, we're anticipating right now at least 3 meetings, and those would generally be following our community series. So we'll have like a public meeting, stakeholder meeting, and then a subcommittee meeting. And then we break, we work, we come back maybe with the planning commission or council meeting. And then again, we go to another series. We go public meeting, work, stakeholder meeting, subcommittee meeting. The subcommittee is going to be providing us that little bit more hands-on direction and guidance to help us bridge that gap. And then as kind of like a final and kind of a cleanup item as part of this, we are also seeking a budget adjustment to reappropriate funds that were authorized in the mid-year, but that were not encumbered. And we can go more into that if we'd like. And then just to kind of sum up the whole meeting, we really have 2 action items. We're really needing council direction tonight. The first is, again, providing direction on the formation of the subcommittee and how we want to go about doing that. Again, it's an optional item. We're recommending it, but I guess one big outstanding question is, should we even have one? What should it look like? And the second is really approving a budget adjustment to reappropriate the funds that were identified. And with that, that concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Okay, short and sweet. Thank you. So before we go to discussion, let's ask some questions first. But let me ask you a general question, and maybe others have. So can you just explain, Stephen, when you're talking about the ad hoc committee, what are you, or Rob, what are you looking for as what you call the bridge between this work, staff work, and the council / planning commission? I'm not sure what you want that to accomplish.
To make things smoother. So I think we're working, this is going to be a sprint, right? It's a lot of work in a short time. We do have a lot of check-ins with council and planning commission, but I'd say there's going to be a lot of decisions happening very fast. And to Stephen's point, it's the process of staff having and the consultant having initial concepts, going out to the community, getting feedback, coming back, proposing something, and then going planning commission council. It really acts as a closer bridge, again, between the 5 of you who are very busy and the staff to give guidance during that process. So it's more of a hands-on approach. Again, you're very busy. This is a very fast process. It was to allow a little bit of delegation from the council and or commission to allow 1 or 2 of you and 1 or 2 of the commission. We could talk about how you want to mix and match if you're interested, just to provide that more hands-on guidance to staff, and then help as a bridge when we're preparing materials to come back to council, as your standing committees do, to look at that, advise, and then bring it back to council. That was the intent.
No, that answers it. Thank you. Is it questions before we get the comments, and we'll come back around again? Councilman Landry, I'll just come up to.
One of my questions is in the tasks J through L, the placement of the subcommittee meeting, if we do have that, having it be after the L of the stakeholder meeting, just to kind of reconnoiter, bring it back before you go into the admin draft. So that was J, K, and L might be a little out of order.
Councilmember Lopez?
Yeah, just a follow-up question to Mayor Reznikov's question. I know you left it open-ended, and we can weigh in with our own opinion. Ideally, given what you said about what an ad hoc subcommittee would be intended to accomplish, do you think it'd be preferable to mix and match members, or what kind of, how do you envision that working ideally?
Yeah, it's your choice. I mean, the city attorney and I have been deliberating. I think in all instances, this is a Brown Act body, and Bill can weigh if there's an option where it's not. But we can do that. We are, the intention is to keep of course, the commission engaged throughout the process. So as there's no gap between the work products, you might want to think about having a commissioner. I mean, one thing, just practically speaking, two of you are terming out, so you might want to just think about this work effort will go through into the next year. So if you do create an ad hoc subcommittee, you think about the membership in that way. Again, beyond that, I think we were just looking for a little bit more ongoing support if you were willing to do it throughout this process. Again, for us, it's very fast, a lot of decisions. And when you're in that environment, if you're waiting a month to go back to council for direction versus, trying to get a little guidance in between that and so forth, just might help a little bit through the process.
And were we to act on that tonight, would you then go to the planning commission meeting that's coming up and solicit membership in that, if that's the structure?
Yeah, great question. So tonight, I think you go ahead and designate council members. We have a plan commission next week, exact same presentation. And so the agenda publishes tomorrow. If your direction is to have a plan commissioner on the subcommittee, we bring that up in next week's plan commission and ask them to put a member or members on the ad hoc subcommittee.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Givens?
Thank you. So just to weigh in on several points, the term residential design standards, I was just now trying to find something on our city webpage, which is the design standards for single family homes. And it kept kicking me to this. And that's not what the residential design standards manual is, the handbook. So I'm not sure you've got the title quite right, because residential in many people's minds is single family residential. So I'm not sure you're quite there yet. And you also want to make sure when you go on the webpage, we don't have the same problem we did with the general plan. Looking up a general plan kept throwing us to envision Campbell, and you couldn't get to the original general plan, the current general plan, unless you knew how to go through it. So just classic search questions. I would be cautious about architectural character examples. Council Vice Mayor Bobby said something, you want to have flexibility for the residents. We don't want to become Santa Barbara. We really want to have a range, and you don't want to say everybody has to have mullioned windows. You don't want to say everyone has to have wood windows. You don't want to say everyone has to have a paved driveway. I'm being somewhat facetious, but you really want to allow character, not prescription. So just be thoughtful about that. I'm a little nervous, and I'm looking forward to examples of projects, of housing projects that actually are the type of projects we want, which is 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, family units, as well as studios. We don't want to just give an example that's all studios when we know we need a mix of units. So we haven't quite figured out how we're going to be discussing the mix of units, the mix of bedrooms, I guess is where you're going.
Question, could we finish up on the outreach and the sub meeting?
Okay, so these are all things that we just discussed, but
Well, what I was hoping is get through the community outreach engagement ad hoc, and then we'll come back and let everybody do some closing, just so we can finalize. We've done that with each section.
Councilwoman Landry discussed the odds several times, but all right. I was trying to be thoughtful.
No, we're going at a good pace, but just if we could close out on that, then come back.
So I'm in favor of having a subcommittee. I think 2 from the planning and 2 from the council is reasonable, because you'll get at least a variety and a different disposition of feedback. So I think that would be helpful. I also think doing the joint committee is useful, because the planning commission and the council have not always seen eye to eye during the process. So I think having a little more coordination and discussion amongst the groups would be helpful. And I do think I'm assuming that the ad hoc committee would go through March. So if it's going through March, as much as I really would love to volunteer, I do think it's has to be evaluated on whether having the same people all the way through the process or doing a transition is okay. You don't want to be disruptive to the process. So I term out in December. So I think that's a valid comment. Staff also brought it up. And what was the other question?
It was a community outreach overall.
I would just stress that we have not, as staff indicated at the beginning, we haven't had the greatest success in outreach to the community. I think we have to find ways to be much, much more aggressive, much more personal. I do not think going to the neighborhood associations generic email is sufficient to reach out to communities. I think we all, as council members, need to reach out to our constituents and people we know in the community to really try and help get engagement up. This is a big deal. So I'm really encouraging of all of us to participate and get as many people as possible engaged.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Bybee?
So are we at comments on the ad hoc or?
Yeah, for comments or questions on ad hoc and the outreach, and then we'll come back to everybody for other
So
final comments.
I'm not totally convinced that an ad hoc committee would be beneficial or useful. The way it was described is that the ad hoc would be possibly providing some direction as a bridge between the council and bring it back to the full council. And that subcommittee may be recommending things that really may not be the consensus of the council. So I would be cautious about that. I also felt it in some of the past experiences that we've had an ad hoc committee where it was more disruptive to the process in that the ad hoc was privy to having information and discussion at subcommittee or ad hoc committee meetings with the project team. And then it comes to council and something was lost in the translation where this committee was on board with something and the council, I felt like I was, well, what are they even talking about? I didn't know that we had decided that. So I would caution that it could be more disruptive, but I'm willing to hear what others have to say. And I also feel that if we do go with the ad hoc, that it should be members that are able to participate from now until the conclusion of the project.
Thank you. And some comments on the outreach. I'm fine with what you presented, just that any outreach to individual groups is not at the expense of outreaching to the community at large. And that's the harder one to do. So that's the one that should be focused on. Given your description of what the bridge is, my gut feel is that I'm not that much in favor of a committee. And if there is a committee, I think it should just be planning commissioners. So if you look at every project that comes in, or as they should come in, somebody comes in, they might go to SARC goes to the planning commission. Ultimately, that decision of 7 people comes to council and council gets to decide on it. I'm not so keen on having some subset of council essentially influencing what comes to council. Because it doesn't necessarily represent council. The vice mayor said sometimes it doesn't translate through, or we've had subcommittees, I think, that maybe have taken on more authority than was intended. It's not advisory anymore. It's we've determined this. So I would prefer probably none, but if you can convince me it makes sense and it speeds up the process, then take 2 planning commissioners on there, which will perhaps speed up the process of planning commission, going through planning commission to come to council. And then council is on equal footing of receiving that. Regardless of how you do it and who's on it, I also would agree with everybody that whether it's council members or planning commissioners, council members we know who won't be here in January, and then planning commissioners, I forget, but we may or may have one maybe expiring, 1 or 2. It should be people that we know are gonna be on the commission through that period and not somebody new. So, but right now I'm inclined to say no, but I'm fine with 2 planning commissioners on there. I think anything of a bigger, I think the mix maybe doesn't work because as a planning commissioner going to feel equal footing with a council member that's going to be voting on the thing later. I just don't think it works. So that's just my thought. Any other, I think I'll come back, but Councilmember Lopez asked me just comments on this before we go to general comments.
Yeah, just a brief comment on the outreach process, because I limited myself to questions. I just want to register my agreement with multiple council members who said, maybe expressed nervousness about targeting particular groups, and then because then you potentially exclude some or becomes more cumbersome. I do want to go broader. I really sincerely, I want to say thank you to everyone here tonight for for those who've commented, but also those who are here participating in the process. Really encourage you to participate in the outreach meetings as well and have a say. That's really valuable input. And I know it's tough. It can be tough to get feedback. So I appreciate the range of different outreach processes and the different approaches to communicating. but really want to continue to encourage that engagement. I guess based on what I'm hearing, I would have a follow-up question, which is that if we don't do the ad hoc subcommittee, and I came in open-minded on that, what would that process look like? So then instead of an ad hoc subcommittee, would you be using the regular council meetings for that? What, special council meetings, would it disrupt the process that you've laid out here?
Yeah, we would just use the council meetings on the schedule we have.
Okay. So I'll say on the ad hoc subcommittee, I guess if there's not a strong majority in support, I'd be nervous about that. I came in open-minded, like I said. The thing I like about just using the regular council meetings, as long as it doesn't disrupt the schedule, is that then we all get a chance to weigh in, and the new council all gets a chance to weigh in instead of artificially limiting it to just who's going to be here. So I think that's more representative and inclusive. And so at this point, I'm leaning towards no ad hoc based off what I've heard, but open to hearing otherwise.
Councilman Landry?
Yeah, when you were asked how many meetings and you said only 2 to 3, I don't know that a subcommittee makes sense for that limited number of meetings. If it's something where you're wanting to meet every other week or once a month, then maybe, but 2 or 3 meetings, as Ann was saying, what does the subcommittee really do? What does council hear? Sergio said the same thing as, having us all hear the same thing at the same time, giving you direction, whether we have to vote it on it or not. I mean, I did come in with the open mind and was like, do I really want to do this? But really, what's the benefit to the whole project? And 2 or 3 meetings, I don't think really does a lot for a subcommittee. Then the question is it part of the planning? Again, the same thing is how many meetings, really, what is the effectiveness of that? And if you had 2 or 3 subcommittee meetings in the consultant fee and schedule, then maybe you add 1 council meeting or 1 study session in lieu of those multiple subcommittees.
Thank you. And we'll finish up on this and then we will go to everybody again for final. And Rob, but when we're done that, if maybe you can, anything that you haven't already summarize so we all hear it and we're on the same page.
So I'm supportive of the subcommittee because staff brought it up. I'm flexible on it. If the council doesn't feel it's the right thing, that's fine. I would just pose the question to staff. They recommended, I think, both planning and council together. There have been discrepancies during the housing element process where planning suggested one thing, particularly in the area of parking, and council did not concur with those recommendations. So I'm a little concerned that staff would be able to control or feedback or do something that it might take them a little bit in the wrong direction, if I'm saying that properly. So I was looking at it as a balanced tool that they asked for. But if council doesn't want to do it, I don't see the value in doing it at all.
I would concur with that.
So if you've gotten the feedback, you want to touch on the feedback on this section, then we're going to go around again and let everybody say any other closing your finger issues, and we'll do the same.
Yeah, I don't think I'm saying anything surprising. So I'll just say this, the process will continue. Staff will more than survive. We'll just be more thoughtful on using the council meetings. We'll look at the schedule. Number one, I'm hearing from the council, no ad hoc subcommittee. But 2, we'll just be more thoughtful on how we use the council, totally understand the equity principle. And if we, looking back at the schedule, need more meetings or need to change the schedule, to your point, Councilwoman Landry, we'll just take a look at that. So.
Okay, thank you. Come back to Council Member Gibbons. Did you want to now go back and issues that are still remaining or questions or comments? And we'll close it out with everybody.
Yeah, I was trying to respond to staff's comments, but does the affordable housing overlay or affordable housing issue, anything like that in the housing element influence these objective standards? How are you thinking? Yeah, because we know we just said that the general plan is the basis for this. So how are we, I'm just curious how you're thinking that would work. And if you don't know, that's fine.
Well, if you think of a big Venn diagram, there's a lot going on. I'd say it this way, and it probably speaks to the density bonus issue. My understanding and feeding back what I heard from council members, and I think yourself, is most of the projects come through Campbell multifamily go through density bonus. And I think it's on 2 points that happens. I'll look to staff to see if I'm saying anything off. Number one, our codes have a lot of issues. So it's hard to follow our codes plainly, and they use concessions and waivers to go around that. And two, there's trade-offs with affordable housing units come into it. So what I was coming back to was our intention is 2 points. We want more affordable housing in Campbell because to meet our housing needs. And to address the density bonus issue, I think these two work efforts might do two things. One is by doing objective standards, you don't force people into having to do PD zoning and the concessions and waivers. So I think our objective is to bring down the need for people to just go straight into density bonuses as a tool. You're giving them clear standards to follow. And then tool two, we wanted to use the affordable housing overlay zone as an incentive to guide affordable housing developers into certain parts of our city where there's higher density and more affordable housing that made sense. And if you'll remember, there's sort of sticks and carrots to go with that. So that's a whole separate work effort. It's not on the agenda tonight. But again, to address the density bonus issue, we were using the affordable housing overlay zone to incentivize affordable housing in the areas that made sense and with the standards and sticks and carrots that made sense for Campbell, if that answers the question.
So I just would offer that it's an unknown at this point, but that it would be involving an ordinance, would it not?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
The overlay zone, the affordable housing unit overlay zone would involve an ordinance, and it has to be an objective standard ordinance is what I'm getting at. My question is, and I said, you may not know the answer yet, but that's just came to my mind.
Right. It'd be a totally separate future work effort.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilwoman Landry, comments?
Yeah, I want to thank you guys and thank where'd the consultant go and the consultants online. And I will make a comment. We have 8 participants online. And we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 people, 2 people have left, but so 16 people, I think is a pretty good start. And let's hope that the participation level increases as we move forward. I made the comment earlier about Stack, and what I really meant to say is the Santa Monica neighborhood, that it's really about, that's a large chunk of our city. And if I know when we were doing the general plan, we moved around from the neighborhoods. And I think that was kind of what I was like, make sure you do the neighborhood of the Santa Monica. The Stack is a great way to put the word out, but we've got social media and Instagram and all these other things. So, but I really appreciate where we're at. It's great. Move forward. I think we want to add as our 4th overriding principle, because we don't want this to become our 5.5-year general plan that we had. But yes, thank you all very much.
Okay, we'll go Councilmember Lopez. And just a reminder, when we're done here, we have to adopt the resolution for the budget adjustment.
So also very appreciative of staff and the consultants' work and the really the heroic effort here on top of everything else that we're doing. I know it's a significant challenge. Just like a couple of things I just wanted to address because others mentioned them and just make it clear so you get a better sense of the consensus. At this point, I'm open to hearing what you bring back on parking. I know that what is here is not a finished version, and I trust that staff will be judicious on that. So I look forward to hearing more on that. I know there's a balance to be struck there. And I am, as others mentioned, I'm open on doing a planning commission subcommittee. Sounds like there's not consensus for a council subcommittee, but if that makes sense and would be helpful, would certainly support that.
Vice Mayor Bybee.
Thank you. Thank you to staff and to our consultants for a great start and a great kickoff. I would be also supportive of the Planning Commission ad hoc. I understand the concerns, Councilwoman or Councilmember Gibbons, but ultimately, the council has the final decision on it. So if the planning commission subcommittee is making a recommendation, it's only a recommendation and their input. So I think there's some value to it.
And I'll agree. Thank you for everything you did here. This is a great start. And I leave it to staff. If you feel that there's an advantage having that subcommittee of planning commissioners, then do that and it'll speed it up coming to council. At this point, what can we get a motion? We have to adopt a resolution approving the budget adjustment to reappropriate the unencumbered fiscal year 2022 funds. So if we can do that, and then Rob, maybe come back to you for any comments or summation you have.
So I'll make a motion that we adopt the resolution approving the budget adjustment to reappropriate unincorporated fiscal year 2022 funds. And per the desk item.
I'll second. And friendly amendment, did you mean unencumbered fiscal year funds?
Pardon me?
Did you mean
Oh,
the
you said-
unencumbered funds?
Did I not say unencumbered?
Unincorporated, I don't know if
Oh,
that makes
I'm
sense.
sorry, it's unencumbered.
Okay. I
No,
didn't-
no problem. I'll second.
I thought you said encumbered. I wasn't sure what was it. Okay, so we have a motion by Vice Mayor Bybee, second by Councilmember Lopez. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Gibbons,
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez.
Aye.
Councilwoman Landry.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bybee,
Aye.
Mayor Resnicoff.
Aye, thank you very much. So Rob, would you like to go through any other comments, closing statement you have, or just recap? I think we've done a good discussion and gotten through a lot of material.
I don't think I have much to add. I again appreciate all the good direction you've given us. I'll say it is, again, I'll underline a fast effort. And the only thing I ask of the council, if there is a need for a special meeting in the future, we'll reach out to you early, but if you could just be liberal with your calendars if we are looking for a special meeting. The last thing I'd say is I'd invite you to try the survey. Again, a lot of the jargon like objective standards is hard to understand. A lot of abstract design is hard to understand. To Stephen's point, we tried to use a really engaging thing. Hey, here's a bunch of Campbell, here's a bunch of buildings in Campbell. Which ones do you like? And then we're trying to sort of reverse engineer from that. So the buildings that they like, we would start to build standards around that, and the ones they don't, they don't. But we'd love your honest feedback if you can't get a chance to take the survey to see if you think it's effective. Other than that, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you. Then we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.